Mrs. Brown, you've got a lovely daughter. Girls as sharp as her are something rare.
Going back over to Pineview to interview Franma, to interview Franny formally. That's Cass Lake, I believe, right over there. This house right here used to belong to my friend PW and his family, Paul Walsh. But they've all grown up and moved on and no longer live there. This is the country club, Pine Lake Country Club. There it is. That was the golf course previously. And there's beautiful Pine Lake, where I spent 2.5 years frolicking, playing and partying. Fun. Popki, blooky, skibbles.
Oh, you're such a sweetie. Oh my goodness. Oh.
If my mom was looking down now, little traitorous slut whore dog.
That's right. That's exactly what she would say. I'm quite sure of that after all these years. I heard that when you came.
5 in the morning?
Well, he woke me up at 1 and said, help me get out of bed. And I jumped up and I ran. I said, what's wrong? See, we had been fine. We had been out to Sandy's to dinner and everything was wonderful. We were talking about the house that he wanted to make in Florida when he retired in 3 months. So I went around and helped him and he just slid off the bed onto the floor. And he said, I can't breathe. So I grabbed the phone and I called 911 and they were questioning me. And I was exasperated because they wouldn't hear me. I said, send an ambulance now. And the lady says, well, have you called your doctor? And I said, yes, a damn doctor. So they sent the police and the ambulance. And I must say they were there in like 5 minutes. And we went to the first hospital and they weren't equipped to deal with it. So they transferred him about 5 in the morning to the other hospital. And after sitting there, I don't know, many hours, they came out and said, you better call the family. And I had no idea that it was this serious heart attack. I wouldn't look at it, I guess. I just didn't want to look at it, that it was this serious. So I called Wayne J. and he came. And then the doctors came out and said we should have a meeting. So Rissa and Daryl and Wayne and I thought you were there, but I guess not. The surgeon came and said, I cannot, this man has been without decent oxygen to his brain for over 14 hours. I can't revive this, but you have to make the decision to let him go. So we talked and talked, and then 3 of us decided he should not have to suffer anymore. But Daryl did not want to do that. So then Wayne talked to Daryl, and then that's what happened. He was gone. So when we had the Shiva for the next week, I don't hardly remember it. One of the things I remember was that Florine was here. And she was so kind. Isn't that weird that that's what I remember? And there were dozens of people, because he had all these friends from all over. And I have cards and letters from them that I'm going to give you. So, but that's that story.
My dad's religion?
He said, I'm not a practicing Jew, and I'm not anything. If anything, you could say I'm a humanist. But organized religion is not something that I can really say I would vouch for.
A humanist, not an agnostic.
Yes, a humanist, absolutely. And I said, what does that mean to you? And he said, that just means trying to do the best I can in this world. for everybody. And then he just shut down the conversation about it. So I did too.
Makes a bloke feel so proud if she finds that I've been round.
What about the grandmas?
The Grammas lived here for, both of them, for like 20 years.
This is Big Fella's mother, Anna Miller, and your mother, Faye Brown.
Yes. When my father died in the year that Toby and I were married, my mother wanted to live on her own, sell her marital home and go live in an apartment. So she did. She went to Clarkston and we found her an apartment, but she was only able to stay there about a year because she fell and broke her shoulder. And she couldn't see well, and we felt that we should take closer care of her. So she went to live with my sister for a couple of years, and then I brought her here, and that's where she stayed until she died at 91 years old. And shortly after, maybe a year or so, Grandma Anna, who was running her own business and on 4th Street in Detroit, her cleaning business was robbed there, and a bunch of hoodlums came in the store and took her money and her cleaning clothes that she had ready for customers and locked her in the basement. And she was down there for some time before another customer came in and heard her screaming for help, and she was rescued. And at that time, Hubert told her that she could no longer live down there, that he couldn't be so worried about her all the time. So what happened in that case was the robbers, who were a bunch of 4 or 5 black kids who obviously were very troubled, grabbed the cleaning, grabbed the cash, and went down and in front of the police station tried to take a getaway bus, a city bus, with all these clothes in their arms and with the police calling to them, and they were all arrested, and Seymour took them to court and with the prosecutor. I don't know what happened to them, but they probably had to go to jail over all this. But anyway, Grandma couldn't see to drive well, and on a couple of occasions before this happened, I went down to pick her up to take her to the office, and she wanted to drive her car over to the room where she stayed occasionally at a lady's house who was a friend of hers. And when I followed her, I could see that she could not drive. She was hitting, like almost hitting every car. She was a ½ inch away. So Hubert saw that too, and as a result of all that, she came and stayed with us. She started off by staying in the summers so she could get adjusted to the idea. Then she came and she used this for her base, but she lived, I think it was in Huntington Woods, where she took care of a retired doctor for a while. She did that for a job because she just could not just stop working, she said. And finally she began to tolerate the idea of not having to go and do something all the time and be such an active, out of the house kind of person. So she came and she began living with us.
Didn't she, those people who robbed her, they were the kids of some of her customers?
I don't know, probably.
I remember when I went to visit her, she lived in the basement. I didn't know she lived at someone else's home too.
She had a room in a house that she took her baths and kept her nice things at. And we tried to encourage her to go there every day, but she liked staying in the cleaners.
She lived in the basement there?
Yes, she had a bed and everything there, and a bathroom, and she liked it there. She felt it was an effort to go to the room when she didn't really have to. When I think of it now, I wonder if she was afraid to go there. But I don't think people were as afraid now to walk around the streets as they are now.
Oh, she'd walk over there to her other house from the cleaners.
I don't know. I remember following her driving because that's how Hubert decided that she couldn't drive anymore and took her license. Told her not to, sold her car and took her license. Anyway, she came here to live. So their rooms were down the hall from each other. And when my mother moved in, Hubert told her that she was a guest and that she did not have to be doing dishes, doing work, or feeling responsible for everything, because he considered that she had had her turn at that and it was time for her to enjoy life. And he would do everything he could to help her enjoy it and to be happy here. And she absolutely adored him. He was funny and he paid attention to her, and she always did really look up to him and love him.
Grandma Brown.
Yes. And when Grandma Miller moved in, he told her the same thing. She was a guest, that she had worked hard, and that we would do everything we can to make her stay pleasant. So the first week or so after she was settled, Grandma Miller came to me and wanted to talk, and she wanted to tell me the story of her mother. She said when she was a young girl and they lived in Poland, the Russians would come out of the north, she said, and come to the villages and try to kill people.
Pogroms?
Yes. And her mother was 50 when she was born. She was the youngest of, I don't know, she said 10 or 11 children in Poland. Anna was. And she lived with her mother then because her siblings had all moved and left and gone, some of them to America, the older boys, had made it here. So when the Russians came, she remembered having to flee them with her mother, and they lived in the woods and they ate potatoes to survive. And it was that kind of life that she had to have at times. And then she said she and her mother escaped with the help of the older siblings, and they went to New York and then came to Detroit, where one of Anna's older brothers lived. And so she and her mother moved in with that brother and his wife and family.
Joe and Bessie?
I don't know the names. I just remember the story because she had many relatives that I couldn't keep track of. And she said that when they moved in there, that the brother's wife turned the running of the household over to the brother's mother. And that's the way it should be. So I surmised from the story that this was what she expected here. So I told her that that might have been true then, but Hubert and I had decided that we wanted her to be a guest, as was my mother a guest, and that we would take care of running the house. They didn't have to. And so that was the way it was settled. However, from time to time, she really wanted to run things, and funny things happened. The mothers, generally speaking, got along well. In fact, Hubert would always say, you know, Franny, it's you and I, and they're against us. And I said, I know, I sometimes can feel that. Because the two of them would sit together when we were going, Hubert and I went out somewhere at night, and they would like push us out the door practically so they could have their own private time, I guess. Anyway, they also argued. One time I came down the stairs and Anna was standing with her walker in front of her bedroom, and down the narrow end of the hall was Faye with her walker facing each other, and neither one agreed to move. So
I can't even picture Grandma Brown doing it.
Grandma Brown stood there glaring down the hall, and Anna wanted to get to the laundry room, and they wouldn't And Faye wanted to get to the kitchen, but neither one would give in first. I mean, it was just hilarious. It's nice to everyone. She was a gentle soul, but she couldn't stand up for herself.
I remember she just being the quintessential sweet old lady. I just loved her. I had the room next door to her, and I remember I got a letter at college one time and from her, and she was asking,
"Oh, really?
Whatever happened to that sweet, nice young boy who lived next door to me, in the room next door to me?"
Isn't that sweet? Yeah, she was a dear. She really was.
I remember she loved listening to the Letterman.
Mm-hmm.
The original Windy. Who's tripping down the streets of the city.
Yes.
Um,
She used to ride her tricycle around the neighborhood when she was in her 80s. Remember that?
no.
And yeah, she had one of those. She got her a big bike for her to get exercise after she had osteoporosis and she broke her bones easily. Just splinter hair enough to make pain, and the only treatment for most of them, because they were always in her back, it seemed, was rest, and eventually she'd get better. But in order to keep her legs and hips exercised, she had a bike at her Florida house, so we got her one here so she could drive around the neighborhoods here too. And the neighbors all remembered that because it was kind of one of those great big tricycles where you wouldn't fall off.
I got no recollection of that.
Yeah.
I remember getting up in the mornings and going into her room. I had to cross, through her room to get to the bathroom. And I'd always just, be I didn't want to wake her up. But I have just the nicest memories of her just being this cute old lady.
Yeah, she was. But she did stand her own. She and Anna would have these silent times when you'd see they weren't speaking. But then they would somehow dissolve that, and then they would be getting along and very well. So it was just on and off.
I remember before Anna came here, I was here. I came in the 81 maybe. Mm-hmm. I remember having I hadn't had family dinners. I don't recall, and maybe I had them when I was really young, but I didn't remember having them. And you, me, Big Fella, and Faye would sit down and have dinner, and Big Fella would regale us with stories of who hid drugs in their anus at work that day, or whatever happened at the psychiatric hospital.
Oh my, that's interesting. I remember, because I don't remember that, but I remember when Anna came, she would cook, and it really helped me but she would cook in huge sums. Like in the fall, Larry would bring apples, and there would be bushels of apples in it. We would have 40 apple pies in the freezer at once. And she loved that. She would get up at 5 in the morning and have these pies going for 2 or 3 days.
I love those pies.
And they were so good. She got famous for it. Everybody wanted one.
After she passed or Big Fella passed, I took some home to California in a bag. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I remember me and Paul Walsh, PW, we would come in after a night of partying and make one late night, and you'd just wake up and there'd be like a half a pie or a quarter of a pie left in the fridge.
And I would have my friends say, "Please bring an apple pie." But I had to sneak them out because she counted them, and she didn't like me giving them away to people. They were for this household, and I could understand. I mean, it was a lot of labor that she did with that, but occasionally we'd take one. And Hubert would say, "Mother," Mother.
I remember him saying, she used to make better crust.
Oh, did he say?
Yeah, crust is not up to par anymore.
Yes, I can just hear that.
Not flaky.
Yes, I can just hear him grumbling like that. It was funny at the time. When you look back at it, it's funny.
I think it's actually still funny.
She went through periods of time.
This is Anna Miller.
Yes, Anna would be angry at me about something, probably because I didn't let her run something, or she would get mad if I didn't have the proper food in the house when she wanted to cook something. And I would have to run to the store and get it for her. And she would sort of pout like. So, when she got older, she was never sick, but one time when I went to Florida, Hubert had a serious neck surgery after a fall, and my mother had a broken bone. I forget if it was her shoulder or her back then. And Hubert had to have therapy. And we looked at all the hospitals here, the 3 different hospitals where he could have gotten the therapy, and they were booked up for 2 months before he could start. And he didn't want to wait because he felt it would be detrimental to his recovery to wait around that long to get his neck therapy. In order for him to move his neck again, he had serious surgery on his vertebrae in the back after breaking those in a fall on the ice. So I called the Florida hospital where we have a place in Venice, and they said we could take him right away. So we had thought about going there anyway on a vacation, so I arranged for all 4 of us to go to Florida for a couple of months to stay at our place, and the 2 sickies could recuperate and Grandma Miller would be along. But Grandma Miller refused to go. She did not want to leave the house. She would not go along with this plan, and she just wanted to stay home alone. But I wasn't about to leave her home alone. So I got 2 nurses to come in and take care of her. One of them to stay at night with her because she was quite a bit older by then and she just couldn't do everything on her own anymore. So as soon as we got to Florida, the 3 of us, and I got everything set up, Faye was laying on the couch resting her back, and Hubert was sitting in the chair. We had already established his therapy the day before at the Venice hospital, and I was going to take him up there every day. And the phone rang, and it was Anna's caretaker. And she said, I hate to tell you this, I know you've only been there a couple days, but Anna fell and broke her leg. And I was in a state of shock. I said, what do you mean? Well, she had, first of all, locked the caretakers out because she didn't agree with me that she needed a caretaker, and she wasn't going to let them in. So when they came to work the first day, she didn't answer the door and they couldn't get in because I had assumed that she would let them in without her. That's why they didn't have a key. So they ran around the house looking in the windows trying to get her attention to tell her to open that door, and they saw her laying on the floor. Through the kitchen window they looked. So they broke in the back door, came running through the hall, and she was lying on the kitchen floor. What had happened was, apparently, she sat down on her knees on a high cushion. She was trying to clean the cupboard, and her knee slipped off, and she was so fragile that it broke her leg. So they got her to the hospital, and when they were calling me from the hospital to say that the doctor wanted to keep her there. So as they told me this story, I said, Hubert, what do we do? I said, I've got to get a plane ticket and fly back home and take care of your mother, and we'll have to figure out some way to get you to therapy. And at the same time, my mother raised up and said, you can't leave us. And Hubert jumped over and he said, you're not leaving me here. I will consider that abandonment. And I said, what are you talking about?
That's too funny words to put with big fella jumped over.
Yeah. He moved quickly, like in shock. And my mother said, yes, there's 2 of us and only 1 of her. Well, I was just absolutely flattered. I started laughing. I thought this is a really funny situation. Everybody is selfish. They just, So what I find,
how did just get the poop on the plate?
Oh, it's different. It's next.
Oh, sorry.
So that was her first and only time that she really hurt herself or, had to be cared for. She was such an independent, strong-minded woman. Another Anna story that sticks out in my memory is when we first moved in this house, Daryl and Mike were seniors in high school. And they had to share a room here. And they were in different high schools. So Mike would go to his high school in Waterford and Daryl to his high school in Southfield for their senior year. And Anna was here for the summer, I believe, at that time. And she had been here for about a week, and she loved to cook, bake things. So she, while the boys were at school one day, she made a big plate of beautiful brownies. Cut them all up and stacked them up on the plate. They were beautiful and looks very tempting. Well, Daryl came home from school, and of course, as a teenage boy who loved to eat, he went for the brownies. They were sitting there, and Grandma stood guard and put her hand up and said, "No, you can't eat those till after dinner." And when she put her hand up at him, Daryl reflexed, and I thought he was going to hit her or push her or something. So I said, stop, you two. We're not fighting over food. Daryl can certainly have a brownie and another one. It won't ruin his appetite, believe me. So he did. And she was disgusted with me, and I suppose she probably felt like I had usurped her power, but I felt it was really silly to argue over something like that. Anyway, next morning, I was up at 7, 8, somewhere in there. Must have been 7 because Papa was still here and hadn't gone to work yet, and it was pouring buckets of rain. This was in June. And I looked out the kitchen window, and there was Anna out in the street, walking in the street in this downpour, where you could hardly tell who it was, with her house dress on, sopping, soaking wet. So I said, "Hubert, your mother's in the street. Go get her." So he looked out, and there was no reaction from him except a blank look. And he went out, and he brought her in. And he said to me, "Franny, get her a warm blanket and some dry clothes and a cup of coffee. I'm going to work." And I said, "What were you doing?" And she said, "I went down to jump in the lake and kill myself, but I didn't drown fast enough, so I came home." And Hubert looked at her with disgust and left. So I was worried about her and upset, and the psychiatrist I was married to walked out the door and left me there. So I did what he told me to do, and things calmed down, and I asked her why in the world she did that, and she said that the night before, after I told him about their battle over the brownies, he talked to both of them. And he told Daryl, "Don't you ever look like you're raising your hand to one of your grandmas here or my wife." And he told his mother, "You don't need to hide the food." And she wouldn't listen. She kept talking while he was trying to talk, apparently. And he said, "Will you please shut up and listen to me?" Well, you don't say shut up to a mother, according to Anna. And that's why she went to commit suicide, because he said shut up to her. And her son told her to shut up, and it was the worst thing that could happen. And when he got home later that day, I said, "Are you going to discuss this about your mother jumping in the lake?" And he said, "She's doing all of this for attention, and I'm not going to react. It's not necessary." That's all he said. So that was that story.
So, you had another story about Anna?
About Grandma. Grandma Anna came to me. I always took she and Faye to their doctor checkups, and Anna was always quite healthy, but then she started to complain about constipation, which was never happened to her before in her whole life. So it very much upset her. So I took her to the doctor and told Dr. Levin that she was upset by this, so he gave her a look. He took a look in there and he said, "I don't see anything wrong here. I don't feel any tumors or anything. So here's some medicine to help you. I'm sure you'll be all right." And he told her about her diet, but her diet hadn't changed at all. And she said, "I've been eating the same thing every day my whole life, and so that doesn't make sense." Which it didn't. But the medicine didn't work. So 2 or 3 days later, she was getting very concerned, and so was I. I thought, gee whiz, this is going to make her sick. And so I called the doctor, and the doctor sent another kind of medicine. So I ran up to the pharmacy, brought it back, gave it to her, and it didn't work. 2 days more. So I called him again, and he said, "I don't understand this. That medicine was enough to blow the back end out of a battleship." And so he said, "Tell her to go in the bathroom, and when she does go, which she will, that I want you to look at it and call me up and tell me what's going on." So I said, "Oh, okay." So I told her that when she went to the bathroom, I wanted to see it. Well, she was mortified that I should want to do this, and I think she thought I made it up or something. And I thought no more about it. I went about my business, and I was in the kitchen, and the lady who worked here to help me with the mothers, give them their baths and so forth, came to me and said, "I've walked by Anna's door. It's wide open, and she's bending over, and I don't know what she's doing." That second, Anna came up to the kitchen, and she had one of my best china plates with a piece of her poop on it. And she said, "Is this what you want to see?" So I said, "Yes, I believe it is." But it really didn't need to be served on my best china plates. I'll call the doctor and tell him. Anyway, his medicine finally worked. What was I going to talk about?
How Hubert only had his name Hubert, no middle name.
Oh, they both told me that in Europe it was uncommon to have middle names, and so they just never thought of giving him a middle name. That you didn't have a long middle name. You just had a first name and a last name where they were from, the grandma.
Huh. He has a Hebrew name.
Yes, they have a Hebrew name. He had a Hebrew name, but I don't know what it was. I never saw it written or never heard it. It seemed unimportant to him.
That's a good story. Did Anna have a middle name?
I don't think so, no.
And on that topic, Faye is Faye's middle name. Her first name is Mildred.
Yes, Mildred Faye Brown.
She didn't like being called Millie.
No, she hated that name. She hated that name, and she hated her picture taken. And I don't have any good pictures of her anywhere, because every time I took a picture, she would find it and cut her part off and throw it away.
So I have nothing for this video to show this is Grandma Brown.
I'll have to search hard to find something, but I will.
If you give it to me, send it to me, I'll scan it and send it back.
Okay.
How did you meet Big Phil?
Okay. How did I meet Big Phil? When I was a young thing in school, I went to music school in Chicago. And when I came home, I had a big piano class that I taught. I had a studio at my house, and I had kids every day and all day Saturday teaching lessons. Also, I'm very active in music at the church. My best friend was the organist, and I was the pianist, and we handled the choir and did all that. So I had a reputation of being in the music world. And one day, they called me from the state hospital here, which I don't know if you ever saw it when it was, the buildings were still there, but it was a huge estate type of thing with many old-fashioned buildings and barns and property. Pontiac State Hospital, near where I lived, near, you know, a few miles away. Anyway, they called and asked me if I'd participate in a program they were trying to start for the patients, which would be music therapy. It was something new, some new idea. So I said, sure, I would come and work on that. But to make a long story short, I ended up working there full-time in the music therapy department, which was attached to the occupational and recreational therapy department. And we just used music to set up programs to get to patients to help them to, you know, add to their treatment program. So when I was there, there was a medical staff, and my very first day at work as a full-time person, my boss told me that my supervisor wasn't there that day, so I had to take her job for the day, which was to go play music for the electroshock treatment. And it was the program they were studying to see how music affected people under that kind of stress and pressure. So I knew nothing about psychiatric work. I was just learning and did what I was told, like an intern would. I took my record player and I went up to the receiving floor on the men's side of the hospital and unlocked the doors, because you had to lock and unlock every door you went in and out. Walked down this long hall, and there was like a cage room on the end, on the left, I'll never forget. I unlocked and I went in and I put my first music on that they told me to do. And all of a sudden I heard this big, loud, booming voice that says, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I turned and looked in shock, and it was Larry Coltoneau. I didn't know who he was. I thought maybe he was a patient. And I said, "I'm so-and-so from the music therapy department, and who are you?" And he was taken back that I would question him. He was Dr. Coltoneau, the head of this thing. So, but he liked...
That's my godfather.
Yes, it is. So he came around and unlocked the door and told me, "Do not ever come in here and not lock this door, da-da-da, you shouldn't even be up here, da-da-da." So then he taught me about music therapy, or not music therapy, he taught me about electroshock treatments. The patients were lined up waiting to have electroshock therapy. And then after they had the treatment, they were placed on a cot and electrodes were put on their head.
Just like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Exactly. And then they picked the patient up and laid him on cots in another room, and a different type of music and a different type of paperwork and studying was done, which was my job to observe all this and do these things. So Coltoneau let me continue, and then after he had me to come and look at a treatment and watch it. And I was absolutely horrified. I had no idea what they were doing. But he explained to me then, and I learned that this was very true later on because I was involved in future hospital work, that it was determined that patients who had serious suicidal intentions and were so deeply depressed that nothing really worked, and in those days they didn't even have Valium until 57. This stuff worked. They could have a patient come in there who had been trying to commit suicide every day for weeks and have electroshock, a series of 8 or 10 treatments, And
One
that
day?
depression was gone. No. Over a couple of months' time. The depression would be lifted, they could go home and function again. It was amazing. I don't think to this day they know what really happened to the brain when they did that, but it did work. In most cases, is why they did it. Then they got, in '57, the drug companies came up with Valium, if you'll remember that, and then immediately after that, all kinds of medicines to treat mental illness. The medicines for the schizophrenic patient and medicines for bipolar and depression and all that. So up until that time, though, they had electroshock and tub therapy and very little else that I was aware of to treat mental illness.
And lobotomies.
Yeah. Well, that had stopped by then, but
That guy in Washington.
this was in the 50s. Before, they had 3,600 patients in that hospital when I went to work there. Now there's no hospital because those patients are either out on living on medication and they don't require that kind of care, or they're in private hospital psychiatric wings being treated. Usually for a month or two they get established.
Different patients, I mean.
Yeah, any patient, you know, that nowadays. But anyway, that was what was going on at that time. And so my point was I met Larry first and became friends with him there, sort of like a buddy. But I would meet him in the hall or say hi, and that was it. And along with, on his same medical staff was Dr. Miller and Dr. Hoffman, Ben Hoffman.
Yeah.
And all that I ever had any contact was I was introduced to them at a meeting, and that was it. I never talked to the others. The only one I had any relationship or talked to was Larry, you know, in passing. Then I, at the time, was dating and married and had Michael.
You were dating and married?
No, I was dating, and then I got married to Glenn Gidcombe, and we had Michael, and I stayed home to take care of the baby, and I was home for about a year. In the meantime, I was also divorced.
How long did your marriage last?
About not quite 2 years, and I was divorced, and I stayed home, took care of my baby at my parents' house, and I needed to get back to work and was very lucky again because a person called me from the Haven Psychiatric Center in Rochester, said they understood that I had worked at the state hospital and would I please come in there for an interview. They had a job opening and they needed to fill it with someone with experience.
The Haven, or was that Havenwick?
The Haven, not Havenwick. The Haven. It was a private psychiatric hospital in Rochester, patterned after Menninger's in Kansas, if you've heard of that. It's a famous, small, private psychiatric hospital, and other hospitals of that type. They're small and they're private, and the insurance plans do pay nowadays, but in those days it really attracted wealthy. So I went from taking care of the average and poorer type of patient, and when I went to the Haven, it was a beautiful place with private cook, and the staff ratio was 2 to 1, and the mental illness was always the same. It didn't matter how much money you had or how much care you'd had before. If you ended up in that hospital, it was for a serious mental illness. So while I went on that staff and met the medical staff, and Coltono was on the staff over there. And then Hubert Miller came on the staff over there. These were people who had outside private practices but also worked at the Haven. And I was on the music therapy, recreational therapy staff at the time. So we went to meetings. Dr. Miller had his meetings once a week, so did Coach, and all the doctors did. They would meet with the staff, and you would go over their patient care and set up a program, and questions were answered about how to do with this with that patient or what that other patient might need that doctor was taking care of. That's how the hospital was. It was very in-depth patient care, 2-to-1 staff. Whereas at the state hospital, there was like 300 to 1 doctor, you know, the difference.
It was 2-to-1, the 2 being the doctors and 1...
2 staff to 1 patient.
And at the public, it was 300
One
patients?
doctor might have 300 patients. I know I was in charge of 120 patients when I was there. So then I continued to work there, and in 1960, I was there many years. It's early 50s. I was at State Hospital. Then in 1968, the Haven closed. And I had started back to school because I could sort of see the handwriting on the wall there, and I was thinking I might be a teacher. My sister was a teacher, and she said, be a teacher, get your ed degree, and have your summers off. Be home with your son. So that appealed to me. So I went back to school, and I got a secondary ed degree. So I went at night and on Saturdays whenever I could to get my credit, so I had that degree also. And I was working in a library at the time while I was going to school, and my parents were supporting me. Oh, I forgot to say, before I left the Haven, I worked generally, I was like the Girl Friday for the medical director, Dr. Green. And he wanted me to be the director of social service and family histories. So I worked with family history, worked with the family of the patient, and went to meetings. And my point of that was I remember going to the first one of the meetings, and I thought Dr. Miller was the biggest slob I ever saw. My private opinion was he would come in for the meeting, and there were 8 doctors and me sitting there, and I was to give the social service history of the family and my impression of the family, and they talked about the patient. And he would come in, and he would have his tie all askew hanging down, and his jacket, and he would throw it on the floor, and he'd throw his books and all of his stuff all around, and Dr. Green always had a tray of coffee there for this meeting. It was a couple-hour meeting. And he'd coffee and donuts there, and he'd spill stuff, and I used to think that is the biggest slob I ever saw. And then he would put his head back, and you thought he was sleeping all the time, like he wasn't even there. And I used to think, doesn't he ever get any rest? Those are just my private opinions. And, you know, like I had of each one of them, something. But that was my impression of him. And we were just like staff relationship. Then the hospital closed. So after the hospital closed, I took my father said, why don't you finish this degree, go full-time? So I did, and also worked in the library in Waterford. And I did...
What year? That was after the Haven closed in 58?
68.
68, sorry.
Yeah. And I had that job going. I went back to teaching piano. I was trying to make money any way I could to keep things going because I felt so guilty of relying on my parents. And I wanted to be a teacher. That was my goal. And I was doing my practice teaching at Pierce Junior High School. And at that time, Colton O called and said, we've got histories we need done. Would you come and do some work, you know, another part-time job? But I took it. So I did histories for him. And that's, again, when I started to do histories for Hubert. And after, like, the 3rd or 4th history that I did for saw his family of his patient, he said, we'll need to discuss this. Would you like to go to lunch? So I said, sure. So we went to lunch, and then he asked me out for dinner. He asked me for a date, and we would sit and talk for hours. And we seemed to have ability to just talk, and I didn't realize hours had gone by. First formal date I went was when we went out with Feldman's, and I remember that was funny because we went to a fancy restaurant in Detroit, and all anybody talked about through the entire meal was food. What they had for breakfast, what they had for dinner, what they're going to have tomorrow, and about this great restaurant and that great restaurant. And I thought that was the strangest thing I ever heard of, because where I came from, food was not too important. You were just lucky if you ate, or you ate something that was good. Say, Mom, that was good pie, and you go out the door and never talked about food or anything. And here were 4 people. That's all they talked about. So when we were coming home, he said, well, this is your first date with me. What do you think? And I said, well, all you do is talk about food. And he thought that was hilarious. I didn't understand why he thought it was hilarious until I got to know his friends better. And we spent a lot of time about food. Food became central. Then I met his mother. And his mother talked about food all the time, too. It was very important. And I thought, well, I think that's very nice. I liked it because it wasn't alcohol. It was good for you. It was food.
Okay, what, do you have bad memories of alcohol?
Yeah, I had bad memories of my first husband. And I had stayed single from the age of 23, 24 till 37, 38 in there, because I was so afraid I would make another mistake. Did not want to have any alcohol in my life because he was a big drinker and continued to drink his whole life. So we continued dating. I was dating a couple others at the time also. And
popular girl.
Well, that's just how you did it then. You know, you date someone one night and someone else another night, and it wasn't uncommon for girls and guys to do that then. But nowadays they seem to go like with one person and nobody else, but in those days you dated several while you're searching around.
That must be because of the AIDS.
Oh, that's right. Nowadays it's different problems.
Dad was a doctor. I mean, that's a pretty good catch. But even if he was a slob, I mean, yeah, because I had worked in that field, that kind of thing didn't really. I mean, I thought it was great. We could talk. We were together, and we did nice things. But I was also dating Frank Reschke, who was the head of the art department at the ad agencies, and he had a big house on Wing Lake, and was a widower, and he had one son who was he was a good father. He loved his child. So it really wasn't like a catch, because there were other catches too, if you want to look at it that way. Big fella's a catch, I said.
Yeah, you said that.
The best, I said.
So I was hesitant at first.
And plus he had that body.
Because he was just so funny, so wonderful, so able to understand what I was feeling about things. And Frank wasn't. Frank didn't really kind of get it. I mean, the other one that I was more serious about. I was engaged at once to Frank, but gave the ring back because I was really entranced with Hubert. We had times when we wouldn't even realize it'd be 6 hours, it'd be gone. We'd still talking, still going on. And he was, I don't know, just intuitive. He was just wonderful. I just fell in love. And that was it. And it never changed. I never was not in love with him.
Do you remember when did it go from a business or a friendship to something more? Like, what was the first time?
When I was doing the histories for he and Larry, and we went to lunch And then he asked me out for dinner. And that was really the first date.
Because dinner's not, that's something social. That's not business.
Right, that wasn't business.
Do you remember the first kiss you shared?
Yes. On the second or third time we went out, he brought me to the door, and I went to kiss him to thank him, just to kiss his cheek, and I said, thank you, it was such fun, and it turned into a real kiss, and the sparks were flying. He was a wonderful lover, very kind, very gentle, very loving. He was experienced. Is that the question?
Something, I don't know.
He was a very experienced lover.
I guess after 4 kids or whatever.
Right.
Or who knows. Oh, so you said you met, when was that dinner? When the first time that you had lunch and then he asked you to dinner? Mm-hmm. When was that? What year?
I don't know. It was after I met him.
You met in 68?
No, we met. The hospital closed in 68.
68, okay.
And I was sometime working, after I was back in school and I was working at the library, that Larry and he called for me to do histories. And I was doing histories for them. And sometime in there, he asked me to go to lunch. And so did Larry. And
1970?
Well, it had to be 70 because we were married in what, 72 or 71?
69?
No.
What I'm asking is, was there an overlap before he was divorced?
Oh, I see what you're getting at. Not that I know of. Let me put it that way. He presented himself as a newly divorced man who had a lot of financial obligations. And he was in the court all the time because he and his ex-wife were battling about money.
One time, this was a story that my grandfather, my mother's father, used to repeat to me at least a few times. I went with Hubert to a house. He tells a story about he went to a house, make a house call, and Daryl was with them, and he went in and shut the drapes, and that was proof to him that he was fooling around and having an affair before he got a divorce. But I have no idea, like, exactly where that house was or what he was even talking about. I mean, shutting the drapes doesn't mean someone's having sex.
What house is he talking about? I don't understand what that is.
He was in Waterford. No, I'm just kidding. He didn't know. He didn't know where he was. I mean, my grandfather didn't know where he was, where that house was, but I heard that story before. I mean, who knows? Maybe Big Fellow's playing the field.
Well, he was going out with others because Seymour had him, wanted him to, there was some lady in the neighborhood or some friend whose husband died and she had like 7 children. And Seymour was trying to get Hubert to go out.
Pitsy, down.
To go out with this lady.
Down.
Apparently.
Or stay there. Good.
Tell me about that later. And also that there was some woman that Seymour knew that owned a tavern, something with the name Red in the tavern. I just remember that. And that I think Hubert went out with her. I think Hubert went there. I think he might have been seeing her when he was seeing me because he sort of would hint at that. And Seymour questioned him, were you down at the Red Tavern today or something?
Putting a little pressure on you?
Yeah.
He's got action.
Yeah, he had action. I said, what happened about the lady with all the kids, the poor widow woman? And he said he had enough trouble. And I thought, I don't know if I like that answer.
Silver tongue at it again. That's where I got mine.
I remember one time when he was medical director of the Havenwick Hospital. And we were on our way to a big benefit affair to represent the hospital. And the head nurse and her fiancé were going to be there too. And Hubert said to me on the way, don't be surprised if the fiancé of this head nurse tries to give you the impression that I've been having an affair with her, because I haven't. And I said, what? What are you saying? I was so angry and upset. I thought I was going to blow the car up. But nothing ever happened. No one ever said anything to me. And
I was always wondering where I got my...
his response was, oh, don't be ridiculous. Don't get upset. Don't be ridiculous.
I was always wondering where I got my gift of gab with women. I didn't realize it came right straight from him. I thought I kind of developed it.
Oh, he loved women. He had friends all over the place. Do you remember that when he, at Christmas time, he had a relationship with the candy company, Godiva Candy Company?
I didn't realize it was a relationship. But
well, oh yeah, they loved him. And he would call them up and they would send out like 25 boxes of Godiva chocolate so he could give to all the nurses and all the women. And then he would give me one and I'd say, this is my special present. You know, I'm supposed to be special. I'm getting the same thing as all your other women. I teased him all the time.
I remember, like, it couldn't have been that many because I think those 25 boxes came in one box, like a big baker's box.
There were 2 or 3 big boxes, and I often had some left over.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that. And he would go back to the freezer.
They'd go in the freezer, and we had Godiva chocolate all the time, which is still my favorite candy.
Yeah, I remember he used to go in there and, you know, he'd waddle down there and have a chocolate and get out of there.
And that's another thing he did a lot of. He would put himself on diet, and it was like watching the lions. He couldn't stop. He would watch the lions, and he would get so angry because they would be losing and playing so awful that he would get up and he would slam the TV off, and he'd come out in the kitchen and he'd pace around behind me while I was cooking. And then next thing I know, he'd go back in there and turn it back on and watch the rest of the game.
He really loved the Lions, or love-hate. I think he loved the Lions, hated the ownership.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you tell me the story, the Shiksa story with Marvin and Seymour?
Yes. After we married, we asked, we were going to have the wedding here, so we could have everybody here to come to the wedding. And it was April, and we asked Gramma Miller about it, or he went to his mother to tell him he was going to marry again, and to pick a date and where we would have it, and she said she would not come to this wedding. And he was hurt and angry, and he said, okay. So my parents had been spending their winters in Florida for a few years, and they were down there still and didn't intend to come home till June. So he said, we'll go to your parents and have the wedding. So we did. We flew to Venice, and my father said he would not stand up for me or walk me down the aisle, and I said, why? And he said, because I already did that with you and your sister, and you both came back. So he said, I'm not, and he also walked my girlfriend Leona down the aisle, and she came back too. So he felt like he was a bad omen or something, because we ended up divorced from our first husbands.
Well, I remember him. What's his name?
Brownie.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was thinking of your brother.
No, Alan.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, whoops.
So my uncle said, well, I'll walk you down the aisle. So we had a very small church ceremony in Sarasota, and Michael and the Whitfield boys happened to be there because they were visiting Easter week. They were visiting my parents for the vacation week, and that's when we had the wedding. So after the wedding, we went to Jamaica for a week for our honeymoon. Then we came home, and we lived at my parents' for a year or so before we found a house, before we could gather the money to buy the house, which is this house. So that was our first year together. And then at the end of that year, we moved here. But I was very involved in taking care of my father, who was in Sinai Hospital dying of cancer. And he was seriously ill, and it was a horrible situation. So every day I drove down to take care of him because my mother was never able to face the illness, and she just said she couldn't go there. She couldn't see it. She couldn't. She was horrified. She'd been married to him for 55 years. And she was so upset all the time that I took care of his care. And so the house, after we purchased it, sat empty for a long time. And then Darryl moved in, before we did actually. Then finally we got to move in here, and I continued my care of my father, who died a few months later.
You didn't, that last question, you kind of digressed a little bit.
What? What was it?
The Shiksa story.
Oh, yes.
The
When we married, we went on our honeymoon, we came back, and I was introduced to Hubert's friends, although we'd gone out on dates before with them, but we saw them more. And one of the most frequent was, besides Larry and whoever he was with at the time, was Seymour and Muriel and his brother and Jackie, Marvin and Jackie. So I learned later that Seymour told me that they took bets that Hubert's marriage to the Shiksa would never last. And all these couple of years later, when Seymour started to tell me about it, he said, I guess that the Shiksa worked out okay, and Hubert said he was happy he'd never been in his whole life. So that was his proof. It was funny to me because I really didn't know what a Shiksa was, and he had to tell me. I said, really? But after that, I was often called the Shiksa. One time, Larry and Stacy was married to her then. We always went to the symphony. It's one of my most favorite things. We had season tickets, and we would meet at Larry's and then drive down. And on the way, we would decide what we're going to do. And I say that because Stacy hated the symphony. And she would go and agree to sit through half of it. And during that half that she sat, she took her book and she read her book because she thought this was the most boring thing she had to do. But they had this agreement that as she sat through half, we would leave and go to dinner. So on our way down, Stacy usually picked where she wanted to go for dinner. This time, on a particular day, Larry said, Franny, where would you like to go? And in the past, I had always been most agreeable because it never mattered to me. I always thought the most important thing we were all together, not where we ate. So I would say, whatever you guys want to do. I always said, whatever you want to do, I don't care. And it irritated Larry that I didn't care. So this time when he said, now Franny, where do you want to do? What do you want to do? I said, I want to go to Carl's Steakhouse. I want the biggest steak you can get for me. And I don't want any hassles about what kind of wine I want to drink either. If I want expensive wine, I'm going to order it. He stopped and he paused and he said, you know, I liked you better when you were a Shiksa. So I learned buy me, get me, take me, and Saks Fifth Avenue is what I learned, is what they told me.
You got more of a Jewish wife?
Yeah.
What,
buy me, take me, get me, Saks Fifth Avenue.
What do you make for dinner?
Reservations. So over the years, it was important to them that I learn these things. But you know, we had the happiest years ever. We had 6 of us, Ben and Phyllis, Larry and Stacy, and Franny and Hubert. We were together all the time for everything. And when those people would get going, they would just like come here and we'd be sitting around having a drink. It was absolutely the funnest time ever. They were so witty and so funny, these guys. And Phyllis contributed, and so Stacy had her own little way of doing things too. I have wonderful memories of that. Many years we were able to do that.
You were married for 22 years?
22 or 23.
How did your family take to you marrying someone Jewish?
They loved Hubert. A lot of our dates were going to my parents' house and playing pinochle. And my dad was a big card player, and Hubert was so charming, and they adored him. There was no thought about what he was, Jewish or not Jewish or what.
That's why I put in his casket a deck of pinochle cards, so he, in the afterlife, him and your father could play pinochle.
Could play, yes.
Because they would need cards.
Yes, that's right, they would. And I'm sure they played many times.
There was nobody, and nobody in the family who just like, there was no prejudice or anything from anyone?
No, I don't know why.
Alan, no one? Just not even a little?
No. There was no one said anything ever. It was just, if they were ever talk about anything, it might be the Catholics.
I mean, just plus that most of the men in your side of the family are strong, blue collar types. He's a white collar, kind of pudgy guy, a little bit out of shape.
Oh, they admired him. He was a doctor. He was intelligent.
But not a manly man. I mean, he couldn't throw the football with me. His back was, or his arm was hurt, or his back was hurt. That was okay.
And that never came up. They admired him.
I don't think there's any nuggets in this mine.
I admired him. He was just, my brother to this day admires him to no end. He really likes him. One time my uncle died in Indiana, and we all drove down. And we drove with my sister and her husband of the time. And that husband did not believe in spending money on cars. So he had no air conditioner, no radio. It was the plainest car. And we rode down with him in the hot summer day. So we had to have the windows open so we wouldn't be too hot. So Hubert, when we got there, we had been sitting in the back seat of my brother-in-law's car, and Hubert said to me, "Do I really have to go back in that car?" And because he was so uncomfortable. I said, "Yeah, I don't know what else we can do." And my brother walked up, and he flew his plane to the funeral. And he said, "Well, Hubert, you can ride home with me." So he did. He rode home with Alan in the plane and absolutely loved it. And Alan, ever after that, thought he was the greatest guy ever, and still speaks very fondly of him.
Did Big Fella speak highly of Alan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were good friends.
Sort of had a memory that
Well, my brother did get into a thing with Michael, if you'll recall. I don't know if you were aware of this. We had a graduation party for Michael and Charlie Brown. They were both the same class. My brother had it at his home on Elizabeth Lake, and it was a big, I think it was a pig roast or something. Anyway, we invited the whole school class, and everybody came to that. And there was some kids there who had pot, and my brother is a guy who can drink alcohol like water, but hates the idea of anybody smoking pot for some reason. Doesn't see the difference or anything like it. Doesn't see the likeness, maybe I should say. And he found out the kids had the stuff at his home, and he was livid, and he blamed Charlie and Michael for knowing that it was there and not telling him. And he started argumentative, of course, but he was 3 sheets to the wind, my brother. And he started with this aggressive, nasty stuff, and hit my son and his son with his fist. So I was trying to get him out of there, Michael, and I got him in the car and brought him home. Hubert had left the party early because he was tired and it was late. And Nancy Whitfield joined me in getting Michael out of there and getting him home. And Michael was so upset and so angry, and he came in the house and Hubert asked him what's wrong. He told him, and he said, Michael said he was going to get a gun. He was going to go shoot him or beat him up. He was so upset. He was beside himself. So Hubert said, no, when you have this kind of anger, what you need to do with it is call the police. If you're this angry, that's the smartest thing to do. So Michael did. And the West Bloomfield policeman came over and said, what's the problem? And he told him about the party and how his uncle was beating him. And the cop said, well, it's not my jurisdiction. You'd have to go complain to the Waterford police on Monday. This was on a Saturday, I think. So by the time Monday came, Michael calmed down and he never did anything about it. But again, Hubert was calming, concerned, and solved the problem by saying that. But Alan still adores Hubert, speaks kindly of him. His anger came out in hostile words. He could cut you up with words if he was angry.
Big fella.
Or he could, like, walk away and clam up and not talk. But I was pretty good at that, too, so we would have 2 or 3 days of silence sometimes. If I was very angry or he was angry with me about something, which was not often, though. Usually we could talk about anything. That was our big attraction, was being able to just talk forever. Hi, you darling girl.
Hi, I met your friend.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Hi.
This is Natty.
Natty.
This is Franny's son's daughter, whose mother is Annie.
Our friends, I don't know of any of them who didn't like Hubert. They said they could never understand how he could be so down to earth and so remember everything about them when they had conversations. He would remember what they told him, and like they were important. He treated them like they were important.
I sort of remember when I was younger, before they got divorced, there was always parties, a lot of people at our house. Mm-hmm. And I remember that was the case here. Mm-hmm. And then my parents got divorced, and sort of like that was a big empty house. It was kind of lonely, dark, little, it always seemed like it was perpetually autumn.
Yes. Oh, that's I like it.
It was nice, huh?
Very nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
You are a writer, after all. And another thing, this is all striking to me, dear, is that you're telling all these things and finding out all these things, but I don't know anything about you to tell me about your life.
Are you going to make a movie?
No, I'm not going to make a movie.
Don't say she's broke my heart. I go down on my knees, but it's no good to find. Mrs. Brown, you've got a lovely daughter.